Hi, welcome to the Sunfiber channel. I'm Alan, and with me today is Camisha Simmons, who is a lawyer that specializes in space law. So, welcome on, Camisha. Thank you for joining us. Let's start with a little bit of your background. What got you into space?
Sure. So I am an attorney licensed to practice in New York and Texas and the US, and I have over 19 years experience practicing law. And I have in my practice over the 19 years been in the business area. I'm a business attorney that am now a space lawyer also, but I've assisted clients with business transactions, restructurings, litigation, and I've always over my career have researched and written on a lot of different issues affecting businesses. And I was always interested in natural resources issues, whether it's oil and gas, given that I grew up in South Texas and Texas was a huge oil and gas state. And of course, my father worked in oil and gas for over 40 years before he retired. And so I've always been interested in natural resources and the mining of natural resources. And how I stumbled upon space was I was researching an issue with respect to mining and natural resources and stumbled upon asteroid mining. And how also, not only that, there's this attempt to mine the asteroids, but that how asteroids have these valuable minerals that we need here on Earth. And they are worth into the, what is it, the quintillions or even more in terms of
Oh,
value. That sort of sparked my interest. And then as I started digging deeper, I stumbled upon these efforts for humans to eventually settle in outer space. And that's further sparked my interest. And one of my first presentations at a space conference, the ISDC International Space Development Conference in summer 2023, was on using the metaverse to settle Mars. My first presentation in the industry was on settlement. And so that is how I segued into the industry. A lot of people, when they're asked, how did you get involved in the space industry? They say, ever since I was a kid, I wanted to do this. And I can't say that for myself. I say that my entire career trajectory and everything in my life led me to this point. Because
yeah.
some things you're just led into is not something that you were aspired to when you were a kid or you read a certain book when you were a kid. For me, as I was going along researching certain issues, I stumbled upon it and it sparked my interest. And now I'm firmly planted in the space industry, and particularly not only with respect to settlement, but with all the things going on the commercial side of the industry.
Right. Okay. How do you see the current state of space settlement? How likely is it to happen in the next, say, 10, 15, 20 years, do you think?
Oh, wow. 10 to 15 years. That's pretty near term. In terms of the state of space settlement, I don't think it's a high priority, whether domestically or across the globe. I don't think it's a high priority right now in the space industry. And you're looking at what's top priority are the commercial interests, the
Yeah.
commercial endeavors, and also, of course, national defense and national security. And so I think unless the government or private actors such as Elon Musk, who wants to settle Mars, unless they really push it forward, currently there's just not a lot of eyes on that particular part of the space industry just because everybody's prioritizing other things at the moment.
Yeah, I saw an email from the National Space Society regarding create your business plan for how to settle in space.
National Space Society is a great organization. I am actually on the Space Settlement Advocacy Committee of the
Okay.
National Space Society, and they put on the Space Settlement Summit every year and in the fall. And of course, I will be speaking on the space business track at the International Space Development Conference in McLean, Virginia in June. And
Okay.
that is one of the conferences put on by the National Space Society. But if you go to the website of the National Space Society, they have tons of publications on space settlement. And that is one of the organizations that has been very vocal and very active in terms of settlement, particularly human settlement of outer space.
Right. How is the laws working now? Like there's the Outer Space Treaty, but what else is going on law wise in politics and whatnot?
There's not a lot of change in the law when it comes specifically to space settlement. We have, of course, the Outer Space Treaty of 1967. We have laws. I think the development right now is more on the law related and the principles related to space resources, not
Okay.
necessarily space settlement.
Yeah.
And when we talk about space settlement, there's always this question as to who or what will settle in outer space. So when we're talking about space settlement, I think we need to pay attention to the fact that we don't know who's going to settle outer space. Is it going to be humans as we are currently configured? Is it going to be genetically engineered humans? Is it
Oh,
going to be what they call the great singularity, which is a hybrid where humans are melded with AI
okay.
and some sort of hybrid human that settles in outer space? So that's a question mark of the who or what settles outer space. But in terms of generally the efforts for human space settlement, not a lot going on. The law itself, we're looking at space resources from space resources perspective under the Outer Space Treaty, which are the governments that are parties to that treaty. It says that none of the parties to the treaty may engage in national appropriation of outer space by
Yeah.
claims of sovereignty or any other means. And then we have the Artemis Accords that provide that with respect to space resources, that the extraction and use of space resources doesn't constitute national appropriation of outer space in violation of the Outer Space Treaty of 1967. And in the US, Luxembourg, United Arab Emirates, and Japan, and even India under their space policy, there's this space resources law that says that private US citizens and non-governmental organizations, they can own space resources, which are defined as non-living resources. So under our US law, which is a 2015 law, it provides that private US citizens engaged in commercial recovery of a space resource own, use, sell, and otherwise transfer that space resource that they're able to obtain when they're engaged in commercial recovery of that space resource. So it appears that any of those resources can be owned. Land is a non living resource, so there's a question mark as to whether or not you can own the land itself. There are
Right.
that say you can only own what you extract, but the US law never defined what a commercial recovery activity means. So it never put a definition to say commercial recovery only means extraction activities versus commercial recovery could mean land acquisition and development. So until that law is further clarified, anyone can interpret that law to say under our 2015 US law, land is a non-living resource. You said if I obtain it, I can own it, then they would just say, okay, I can own the land in place. And then there would be a dispute and it would have to be resolved if someone challenged their ability to own. But in particular, of there being any law that is specifically related to human settlement of outer space, there really isn't right now.
So if you go to an asteroid, a reasonably small one, and you start mining it, and you mine the whole asteroid away, would that not be considered like appropriation of the asteroid?
I would say no. Some could argue that given that there's this global effort, whether it's Artemis Accords, the UN's working on principles related to space resource
Yeah.
activities, and they all agree that you can extract and use space resources. There's nothing under any particular binding law that says you cannot deplete a space resource, right?
Okay.
So if you go on there and say we're only extracting and using the minerals on that asteroid. And if we completely deplete that asteroid, that was our extraction and use of that asteroid,
Okay.
that would be a claim of sovereignty over the asteroid where you're appropriating the asteroid. You're just saying, use it and extract it, and there's nothing that prevents me from depleting that resource. Now, if you're a private company or private individual, as we are, and you go in as a private company and mine that asteroid, if you're a US company, you're going to say, well, under our 2015 law in the US, it says that if I'm engaged in commercial recovery of a space resource and I obtain it, then I can own it. And For private companies, the U.S. law provides that you can own that space resource. It all depends, but I would think it's just someone would make the argument that they are just extracting and using, and under Artemis Accords and everything else, you're
Sure.
allowed to do
But
that. And no one
all the law.
says you have to preserve that resource for future generations and not completely deplete that resource.
The follow-up question is, if a private individual or company were to redirect an asteroid into Earth orbit or Earth Moon L5, would they be able to claim we extracted it from where it was and moved it into Earth orbit, so we're going to process it? We haven't processed it yet. Would other companies be able to go, oh no, it's still a space resource we can extract from it? Or would they be able to say, no, no, you're being pirates if you start extracting from our asteroid?
Yeah, so I think one critical consideration in that scenario is that first party that got to that asteroid, are they still in technical possession of that asteroid, where they still possess it, where they still have active operations, where they're saying we're still operating with respect to this asteroid and we're in possession of it, we're actively mining, operating with respect to our mining activities on this asteroid. If so, I think you would invoke the Artemis Accords, which says that when you're in a certain area in outer space, that you can create a safety zone, which is meant to be temporary, that pretty much can protect your operations. And then also under the Outer Space Treaty and even under the Accords, it provides that you cannot engage in harmful interference. You have to avoid harmful interference with the activities of others, that you have to exercise due regard for the activities of others. So if I'm a private company or a party that's mining an asteroid, I'm going to invoke a bunch of different provisions that say that either I'm continuously operating in possession of this asteroid, so you can't harmfully interfere with my operations. You have to exercise due regard for what I'm doing here. And then you're going to say I'm creating a safety zone around whatever operations that I have with respect to mining this asteroid, to ensure other parties don't interfere with my mining of that particular asteroid.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. That's one of those things I've been wondering for like months now.
Yeah.
That's a lawyer
Yeah.
about it. Let's move a little bit off. What kind of ethics are there in space settlement? What kind of ethics parts do you see? Is it ethical? Do you see people saying that it might not be ethical to move to space?
When you say ethics, can you narrow it? Because there's plenty of people, and as you're fully aware, that are against anything with respect to outer space, right? They don't want us to do anything with outer space. And some are just, their position is we need to focus on our problems here on Earth. Why are we worried about outer space? But in terms of ethically, I think the only ethics issues you would run into are bioethics issues, whether if there's any people against genetically engineering humans to be able to survive in outer space, ethics in terms of people's positions on whether or not people, it's not really ethics, but it's their belief and their position regarding whether or not we should even own any part of what's in outer space, whether or not we should be able to possess or use or extract anything in outer space. So everybody has their belief system and their positions on those things. But I think in terms of ethics, there's nothing, unless there's extraterrestrial life and that's already inhabiting what we're trying to inhabit, then we're getting into the ethics of colonialization and taking the land and property of others that are already a life form that's already there, and we're taking whatever belongs to them. But if there's no life forms that exist that inhabit and claim the particular territories that we may claim or humans may claim in outer space, then I'm not sure if we run into too many ethics issues. But there are organizations and schools of thought that are sprouting up that are actually dealing with a lot of those issues.
What laws or treaties do you think should happen at this point to speed up the settlement of space or speed up resource extraction within space?
Speed up resource extraction. So I think we have enough for U.S. side. We have our 2015 law for resource extraction. The UN is working on a set of principles on space resource activities. It's in draft form. They're still going back and forth and marking up the draft. So that eventually will be finalized. We have the Artemis Accords that says you can use and extract space resources, and that doesn't constitute national appropriation. So I'm not sure if we need more treaties or accords or laws, given that space is hard and capital intensive, no matter what you do. I am of the persuasion that we should have less law, less regulation until we figure out what we're doing. And I think if you're infusing private capital into these activities versus government funding, I think the more freedom to navigate space you give the private actors, I think the more they'll be willing to put capital at risk to actually engage in the activities in outer space. So I'm not sure if we need more regulation at this point if we want more capital funding to flow into the space sector to even enable us to do what we're trying to do in outer space.
Okay. Okay, that's most of my main questions. What kind of questions should I have asked that I didn't?
I think in terms of settlement, the concern that many believe that space is not for all, that especially space settlement, who are going to be the first settlers? Is it going to be the haves and not the have nots in terms of, is it only the wealthy that'll be able to
Right.
do anything in space? And so if we want human settlement to be people of all backgrounds and all socioeconomic backgrounds and income levels and wealth levels, then of course you would have to probably have some sort of public private partnership where the governments partner with private sector to ensure that others that aren't so wealthy are able to also go and settle outer space.
Okay, yeah.
And then another question is the big one. You can't do anything without funding. How is all
Yes.
this going to get financed, right? So, how do you incentivize governments and private actors to even finance what we're doing, especially when it comes to human settlement of outer space?
Okay, so how do you see that happening?
Well, I think who's going to lead the effort is going to be probably private industry. And with anything, of course, you have the people that are the enthusiasts that always have believed that we should be able to settle in outer space, and they believe humankind was born to expand into the cosmos. But for the others, if you're going to spend, if you're going to risk life, if you're going to risk capital, if you're going to do all this, then there's going to have to be some sort of business case in terms of the return on the investment for even doing this. And so I think once we think of in terms of return on investment, the business case for this, I think we'll probably get there faster versus just saying, oh, I'm an enthusiast and you have some religious or spiritual reason for why we should do this.
Yeah, I'm actually personally trying to get a company going to make space settlement happen, and it's just like, how do I pay for it while I'm working?
Yeah, yeah. So that's the thing. Now, and we look at one very high profile person that's, I don't know if it's sincere, Elon Musk, who says, everything I'm doing is for us to eventually settle Mars, right? And he keeps saying that this is my entire goal is, and all this money that I'm trying to make is to fund our eventual settlement on Mars. So is that the case? Only he knows the truth of that, but at least there's someone who's has lots of billions, at least in net worth, maybe not that much in cash laying around, but in net worth,
Yeah.
that is saying, I'm willing to put my personal funds on the line to get us to settle in outer space.
Who else should I talk to? Do you think?
In terms of who else I would recommend for National Space Society, the Dallas Grant, he's the COO of the National Space Society, and he's heavily involved on the Space Settlement Advocacy Committee that I'm on with NSS. And then I would, if you're interested in any of the Mars stuff, it would be Dr. Pascal Lee, who does all the Mars stuff, and he does the analog for Mars out there
Oh,
on Devon Island.
oh, in Northern Canada. Yeah.
Yeah. Those are two people. If you're would be probably Dale Scran, who's big on space settlement, and Dr. Pascal Lee for anything on Mars.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any book recommendations, things I should read about?
Not necessarily space settlement, but one book that I read has to do with the space industry, more of rocket companies. I thought it was real well written. And for me, you can have great content, whether it's space industry subject matter or whatever, but if it's not well written, I'll put the book down because I write a lot myself. If I don't like the writing style, I won't get through it. But one that I thought was well written was When the Heavens Went on Sale by Ashley Vance. And I thought that was a really good book, and it's more about the rocket companies, but because it was so well written, I thought it was a good read.
Yep.
If you're interested in physics, the book titled Einstein Wrote Back My Life in Physics by John Moffat, and he's a Canadian physicist. I thoroughly enjoyed that book, and he is the one that came up with the variable speed of light theory. So I
Okay.
thought it was very interesting. Yeah. And then for any other space settlement publications, I would just refer you to the National Space Society website.
Okay. Yeah. I've definitely been exploring that over.
Yeah,
So, how was this talk?
it was good. It was great. Good questions. I like getting good questions because it just makes me further think about the issues that I'm always writing. I'm always talking about these issues, but when you get good questions, it gets you further into thinking about what we're trying to do in space. And it further refines my thought process on these issues.
Okay, great. So, thank you so much for coming and joining me on this chat.